It's Robert here, and I've been wanting to make this video or one like it for a long time involving JFK assassination, the role of J.D. Tippit, Jack Ruby, Lee Harvey Oswald, make some speculations here, some stuff that a lot of people don't know about, haven't heard about, if you can believe that, or never really pursued this angle, which is theoretical, and I'll admit it. I'm going to take my time and try and go through this. I don't edit videos. What you get is what I put down the way I put it down. There may be some mistakes. I might get some names kind of goofed up. And we'll let this wander a longer video because I think it's important to understand perhaps what was really going down. And I'm not going to say this person shot that person or this person shot that person very much. It's all speculative, but some of this makes pretty good sense. Well, let's start at Friday morning. 1:30 a.m. in the morning, Friday of the assassination. And we're going to go to a place called Lucas, a B&B restaurant at 1:30 a.m. And this involves testimony and narrative provided by the night head waitress or night manager, Mary Lawrence. 1:30 a.m. Who comes in? Jack Ruby. He sits in a booth. Who's at the counter? Well, she thought it was Lee Harvey Oswald because in her description, 5'7", slight, looks just like Lee Harvey Oswald. But she said in her testimony that he had a scar by his face, by his lips. And I don't think Lee Harvey Oswald had a scar there. Anyway, you can find this testimony taken by statements made to the FBI on December the 6th, 1963. Oswald 201 Case File, Volume 20. If you look, you can read her direct testimony. But anyway, Ruby sat next to this Oswald lookalike guy, or Oswald, and they talked for a while and then left. Ruby paid the bill for both. This was at 1:30 a.m. Now, let's look at Jack Ruby for a minute. And we can place Ruby, perhaps by testimony, at around 10:30, dropping a man off by the grassy knoll area in a pickup truck. And a lady testified or stated that the man who got out of the truck had a case that looked like a gun case. Now, that's rumor. I don't know. I know you'll find that if you look for it. And the truck was actually stalled there. The man driving the truck appears to have had a description that looked a lot like Jack Ruby. So we put Ruby there at 10:30, possibly dropping off an assassin to go up on the grassy knoll. I'm going to call it the south side because I think there was triangulation. I think there were shooters on the north side of the underpass, the south side by the grassy knoll fence area. And I'm not so sure the assassination, the guy who shot the pistol was actually in front of the picket fence, right by where the steps go up towards where Zapruder was taking the film. There's a series of steps. There were three guys halfway up the steps. And then there's a concrete sort of wall, and it's dark in shadow. I think maybe the shooter of the pistol was there, but that's speculation. There were people behind the picket fence. One might have been in a police uniform. We know that witnesses say they were pushed away and cops stopped and said, don't go up there. were Secret Service and had credentials, and those credentials could have been fake and the uniform fake, provided by another guy we won't talk about. But in that area, I don't think James Files had anything to do with it, and I also don't think Roscoe White had anything to do with it, nor do I think Harrelson's was one of the three hobos that were found in a boxcar. That's just my take on things. I could be wrong. They could have all been there. There were a lot of people there, in my opinion. And they had set up a triangulation of fire, and I'm not so sure that there weren't shooters under the railroad pass waiting. They were going to stop the car there if they'd gotten that far. I believe the limo slowed down right on the marks that were on the pavement, and shots came from all over the place. But we don't know where, and we don't know who. There are people in Daltech. There are people in the bookstore, depository. Dealey Plaza was surrounded, and I don't think Kennedy was going to get through there. They didn't want to shoot anybody else, in my opinion, especially Jackie. That would have been terrible. Anyway, now what? Okay, let's. Oh, and by the way, there is some stories that Ruby was by the Records Building or the City Hall building just before the assassination at about 11:20, and he supposedly had a conversation with an informant named Bob Vanderslice. Bob Vanderslice, right across in Dealey Plaza at the let's call it City Hall or the jail or whatever. And he said to Vanderslice, hey, you want to go out and watch the fireworks? There's testimony to this if you can find it. This was 10 minutes before the assassination. So Ruby was in Dealey Plaza. Next, we find Ruby at Parkland Hospital, and he made a show of shaking one guy's hand and talking to them in the hospital. I don't think he stayed long. I think what he did there was trying to verify pretty much the wounds to Kennedy were fatal and possibly put a bullet on a gurney or stretcher in the hall that dropped on the floor later, and that became the famous pristine magic bullet. I speculate maybe Ruby went there to plant that and then head out towards his apartment, which was over on 10th or 12th Street on, what was that, the south side of Dallas? Anyway, he was heading that way, and I'll tell you why. All right, now, let's talk about Tippit. A lot of people think Tippit was this highly honored, respected, famous, poor guy who got in the way and got shot, ambushed. He was ambushed, all right. But I want to talk a minute about another restaurant, and this is Austin's Barbecue, where it was known that Ruby worked on weekends. Tippit, J.D. Tippit, worked part-time there at Austin's on weekends, and another place too, trying to pick up extra money. In my theory, a lot of this is about making money, and Tippit, we're going to see new Oswald, knew of Oswald, and knew Ruby. Now, here's how we go. And Tippit's role in this, in my humble opinion, goes deeper. Anyway, Austin's Barbecue. Tippit has a girlfriend. Tippit's married and has 2 sons, and he's carrying on an affair, or affairs, depending on how you look at it. But the principal was, let's see if I can get this right, Johnnie Maxie Witherspoon was the girlfriend. And she was married too, but separated for at least 2 or 3 years from her real husband, but not divorced. He supposedly was divorcing her. But Anyway, this Johnnie Witherspoon gal, hot waitress at Austin's barbecue, was known to see Tippit. And there is some testimony or stories from the manager, who was female, at Austin's barbecue, who said they were definitely an item. And Johnnie Maxie Witherspoon was pregnant, she said, the manager, with Tippit's child at the time of the shooting. And they were an item. Now, later on, this Witherspoon gal gave testimony at the House Select Committee, which you can find the transcripts of. And she did not deny that she had been in an affair with Tippit, that it had lasted a couple of years. Tippit had given her a car, and she was pregnant, but she claimed it was not Tippit's baby. The manager at Austin's barbecue said, oh, it was his baby. And they were planning to get some money and live together. And that brought Ruby into the picture, because Ruby, I believe, offered $10,000 cash to Tippit, under the guise of Tippit was going to use Johnnie as a driver from the Texas theater out to, was it Rosefield, and make an escape. She was going to drive him in a red Plymouth Fury. And she and Tippit were to get paid $10,000 for doing this. Now, Tippit reputedly had borrowed his best friend's car to use that day, a red, I believe, Plymouth Fury. This is well known that he had made arrangements to borrow a car, we'll call it the red Plymouth Fury, to use that day. Tippit had also, and Oswald, as they left their houses in the morning, made sort of like notes or confessions. Tippit said, if something happens to me, to the son, know that I love you. Now, that may have been at lunch, early lunch, at 11, because Tippit was home at that time, but heading out. All right. I know this is complicated, but anyway, here's my speculation as what went down. After the shooting, Oswald wound up back at his rooming house, making a change of clothes. He ducked in. The lady there who ran the house and owned it said she saw him just after 1 o'clock. She knew it was that time because she was watching Days of Our Lives or some such. And as Tippit was inside changing and supposedly getting his gun, his pistol, I don't think this was the case. I think he was making a change of clothes out of his work clothes and getting what little money he had and getting ready to rendezvous with Jack Ruby, because Oswald was to get paid $10,000 and knew he was going to be the patsy. All right. Now, this is speculative in the details. How would I know? Anyway, when when Oswald's in his rooming house, a cop car pulls up. Now, I think in that cop car was Captain Westbrook and Detective Croy, and they honked the horn twice. This suggested and told Oswald, don't go to Ruby's place to meet. Go to the theater and rendezvous up there with your driver, who's going to make the driving escape out of the back door of the Texas theater. All right. Now, who was the driver? It gets deep here. There was a pregnant lady in the fourth row of the Texas theater. Oswald went in, went to the front, sat by a guy for a few minutes. Then he went and sat next to this pregnant lady in the fourth row. This is known. I believe the pregnant lady was likely, very likely, Witherspoon. Maxie, Johnnie Maxie Witherspoon. And she was going to drive Oswald, because Oswald did not drive, in the red Plymouth Fury out to the airport and make escape. And I believe David Ferry was the guy waiting. And I believe Oswald knew this. I believe Oswald knew he was going to be the patsy. But he also knew that he had never done any shooting and they couldn't pin it on him in his own mind. And Oswald needed money, and of course, $10,000, a lot of money. And we know Jack Ruby got $50,000 on Monday. And he put it in the safe and told his attorney about it. And if something happened, blah, 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 blah. Of course, Ruby was tied to the mafia by way of the Carousel Club. And also, here's a little known fact. Maxie Witherspoon had a sister. And she went by the name of like Devona Dale or something. And guess what she did? She worked as a stripper. And she had worked in the Carousel Club and the other club that Ruby owned, or ran or whatever. So we got, Maxie has a sister that's a stripper. Do you see? Now, there was a Love Nest apartment out there on 10th Street, only a block or so or two from where Ruby stayed, if I get this right. The sister lived out there on 10th Street. A lot of people say, well, that was Tippit's usual beat. No, that's not true. But he was out there all the time. They saw him all the time. People thought he lived there. They called him Officer Friendly. He was in and out of there so much, and maybe he did live there. Now, again, Witherspoon said he had another girlfriend. I forget her name. I think this was a fabrication to get her off the hook when she did get finally called in, talked to the House Assassination Committee and denied that she was pregnant with Tippit's baby. She said she'd gone back to her husband. The night manager at Austin said, no, the day or two after the shooting, she went back to her husband quickly and stayed with him, and they reconciled. Of course, by now, Tippit was dead. Oswald was about to be dead. Blah, 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 blah. But I think the pregnant lady in the theater was a contact of Tippit's going to drive Oswald. Now, Tippit did not get the two-honk signal. He stayed with Plan A. Plan A was basically to meet in this, about right where he stopped eventually. And he was confused. He had waited by the gas station looking for the bus. Oswald was not on the bus, so he quickly drove over to the Top 10 record store, made a call. Nobody answered. That could have been a signal that Plan A was still on. And I'm just speculating, but I think he was going to get some money, all right, Tippit, from Ruby for his role in all this. Maybe not all of it, maybe some of it, because the part two was to have the girl in the theater. Why would a pregnant lady be in the Texas theater watching War as Hell? Why? And Oswald did talk to her for a while before he moved to the back area of the theater on the main floor. The second Oswald was upstairs after the arrest was made. But I think Tippit was ambushed. I think Westbrook and Croy were in the alleyway between the two houses, right there at that address at 10th Street. I think the Oswald lookalike got out on the street. Tippit stopped, got out of the car, saying, "Where's Ruby?" "Oh, Ruby's right over here," and got whacked by, it could have been a guy called Larry Crawford, who was more or less a helper at the Carousel Club might have lived upstairs, might have had a little bit different toward orientation, which maybe Ruby had. I don't get into that. This is about killing and assassinations. But anyway, I think Tippit got whacked on purpose to become not only a connection to the Dallas police force, but a distraction for the patsy to be a patsy for the patsy. All right. It also saved Ruby $10,000 to $20,000 cash because now that Tippit had been shot and sacrificed, he didn't need to get paid. And also, there was going to be no rendezvous at the Texas Theater. I think this was where Oswald was going to get shot, possibly by Westbrook, possibly by whoever was there. But Oswald was not. He got arrested. Westbrook showed up at the Tippit murder scene within minutes and had the fake ID wallet of Oswald going around saying, "Who's Alec Heidel? Who's Lee Harvey? Anybody know?" They got that on tape. That meeting was planned in advance, like so much of this was planned in advance. And that evidence was planted, in my opinion, to put the finger back on Oswald for not only the Kennedy assassination, but also the Tippit assassination. They got a double jeopardy situation going. So then all of a sudden everybody converges on the Texas Theater. We're talking around 1:30, and the arrest is made. Oswald says, I'm not resisting, and he didn't get whacked. And the odd thing was that he had his own ID on him in his wallet in his back pocket as he got arrested. For whatever reason, he didn't get shot. Ruby knew then that he was going to mop up the deal by arrangement with Dallas police on Sunday morning when he shot poor old Lee Harvey Oswald, who probably, in my mind, never did shoot. Somebody else did with a rifle to pin it on him. The Carcano rifle was a setup. The fingerprints were a setup. Everybody was involved in the cover-up. And it probably traces back to a combination of the mafia and the CIA, a rogue element, whatever. David Atlee Phillips and Angleton, and these guys who had experience with overthrows and coups in South America and Latin America had been active in these things. Plus contacts, CIA contacts, and FBI. Hosty was FBI and had talked to Oswald twice in November. Oswald supposedly got pissed about it, but Hosty was FBI. You got Westbrook, Captain Westbrook. He was CIA eventually. He transferred out to Vietnam and did undercover work with the CIA in Vietnam. And as you know, Oswald had done CIA stuff over there in Japan and Russia and all that hoop-de-doo. I think Oswald thought he was a James Bond double agent and having all kinds of fun, and finally was going to get paid a lot of money and get off because they wouldn't have evidence to really convict him. I think that was what he was thinking. He'd get $10,000, $20,000, and then he could go back and support his beautiful wife and family and get reunited and live good. But that's sort of my narrative on all this. If you dig deep, you will see these connections. And the important thing is these contacts and meetings. And there was more. There was a Campisi's restaurant. And by the way, Jack Ruby had done business dealings with the guy who owned Austin's Barbecue. And they owned another place, and it's not clear to me whether Ruby was a silent partner or a partner in these things. And he also knew the Campisi's, who had the Italian restaurant. It goes round and round, and I can't say for sure. But I think there's an interesting little angle there of how Tippit connects into the story to Ruby and Oswald. And those three players were the main famous players, and kind of how that all went down. I hope it's clear. JFK, rest in peace. Lee Harvey Oswald never told anybody anything. He was dead. And Ruby wasn't going to talk either, because they knew they could take him out anytime they wanted to. It's interesting that Oswald, Tippit, and Ruby never really said anything. Neither did Ruth Fade and a bunch of others. But those that they couldn't trust, like Daniel Craig, the detective that police officer saw some things down there in Dealey Plaza that didn't ring true, and a bunch of them, minor players that may have started opening a can of worms, went underground real fast and never talked again. I don't know. Draw your own conclusions. If you think this is BS and horseshit, I don't blame you. But if you look, you will find these names and a few others tied to the restaurants, to the Lucas B&B, to Maxie Witherspoon, to J.D. Tippit, back to Oswald, back to Ruby. And we got interaction there before the actual shooting went down. That's my point. Have a good day, and thank you for listening to all this.